Welcome back to the last installation of this 3-part series surrounding what constitutes a world in Kingdom Hearts. If you have not watched the previous two, I definitely recommend it, as I do reference some things that I've already discussed in prior videos. The focus of this video will be on what a Worldline is, and the different forms of travel between them. I will want to make a follow-up video to this once Kingdom Hearts Union Cross and Melody of Memory release, just because a lot of information we have is based on a very small amount of information that I believe these titles will expand upon. I am basically releasing this discussion out as more of a theory crafting video, as opposed to simply presenting more or less facts as I tried to do in the previous two videos. While I will be doing that here as well, I just know that most of the info we have is interpretive, and this will be my take on that information. Also, I do want to say that there will be spoilers for The World Ends With You and Remind going forward. The first indication I had that Worldlines might be a bit more pervasive than we thought was the scene in Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance, where Sora and Riku are staring out at sea and say the same lines as they do in Kingdom Hearts 1. There were several things that bothered me though. Their location was different to that of the tree they sat on when first reciting these lines, the time of day was also different, Riku's hair was changed, and the most important one was that Kairi was seemingly not present. Could this be an instance of a different world line? Well, let's define what a world line is. This is a hard question to answer right now with the information we currently have. While thinking on this concept of a world line, I came up with 3 lines of thought. World lines are separate instances of that singular world that coexist along with one another. World lines are different versions of that world, i.e. the world, Datascape, Dream World. World lines refer to the new worlds as described by Xehanort in Dark Road. First off, when are world lines introduced? For us, the first direct reference, or at least usage of the word, is in Kingdom Hearts 3 when Lucy discusses them. In Secret Report 11, he talks about how the Dandelions are trying to jump to another world line, using the same method that they originally used to transfer to multiple world lines previously. This line really confused me in understanding what a world line is. However, if we go very far back in the timeline to the Age of Fairy Tales, the world consisted of one big landmass. They were all connected. When the original Keyblade War happened, darkness spread across the land, and from what we are aware of, this seems to be when the worlds became separate. According to Xehanort in Dark Road, it was at this point that these worlds became self-contained, had their beginning, a starting line that then went forward in time at their own pace. I find it very interesting they define it this way. If we interpret this explanation to mean that Xehanort is talking about world lines, then a world line would seem to be the line of that world as it progresses through time. This is actually a term in physics, although their definition is a bit more broad, stating that a world line is a mapping of a 3-dimensional object, be that a particle, observer, or object, against time. I wanted to note that the definition of a world line stretches to particles and observers. In The World Ends With You, they make a big point of saying that to you, the observer, the world ends with you, and you have the power to expand that world. So to a particle, its existence and experiences are their world in an abstract sense, thus making the term world line mean a bit more in that light. I find it interesting, but for this discussion we will keep this in the context of just discussing worlds. As an example, if we take for instance the Earth in space and rotate it around the Sun 360 degrees, we perceptually would not be able to tell, right? If we are given 2 sets of coordinates, they would match. However, the time it would take to reach that second coordinate would be our time factor, or our world line. Now, instead of identical variables, we now have this time variable that differentiates between them. If we think about it like that, time would be a variable in that vector. So Xehanort describing these different worlds that go at their own pace actually does make sense, since everything that happens to the observer seems to be theoretically variable based on time. There exists this theory that at any point on a world line, space-time is split into 3 parts: the future, past, and elsewhere, which ends up forming 2 cones that center at a specific point in space and time. These light cones at that point in time are formed by all events that can be connected through light rays with the event. Does this ring any bells? To me, I instantly thought of Kingdom Hearts 3, wherein we see Kairi and Sora flying through this void surrounded by light rays going towards them. Well, if they are literally traveling back in time, or to a then new world line, then this would make sense. They'd be traversing through this cone towards a current point in time. Same with Kingdom Hearts 1. Sora closes his eyes and seemingly travels to the past of Hollow Bastion to witness Kairi and her grandmother. It's unclear with Kingdom Hearts 1 because he seemingly either dreams or believes enough that he transports through this void with light rays back in time. The same thing seems to happen with Beast. However, he actually does make the journey physically to Hollow Bastion. Continuing, in our previous discussion videos, we have outlined and shown how datascapes and sleeping worlds are themselves considered worlds. which would then mean they have their starting point and then continue forward in time, thus, by the above, defining them as a world line. I would argue that these 2 points go very nicely together, that A, if a world line is the world itself along with the time component, then B, any new version of that world, a datascape or sleeping world, would also be considered a world line as well. How about the last point then? Well, let's consider the example Luciu gave us, when the dandelions hop to Worldlines and Union Cross. If Worldlines are a separate instance of that world, a parallel world, meaning there are multiple iterations of that world, and you can hop between them, then when the dandelions travel to a different world line, Luciu would have to travel to that same world line in order to meet back up with them, as he says he bequeaths his Keyblade during the chaos. However, we are given no indication that he ever jumps world lines, even further, that multiple Daybreak Towns exist, other than the real Daybreak Town and the Datascape version. In my opinion, I would argue that Luciu is watching over them through the Master of Masters computer room, wherein we see several different screens that arguably mimic and the wisest surveillance of Roxas. When the dandelions hop world lines and seemingly travel forward in time, they all seem to coexist within the same universe. What I mean by this is that Skuld, Ventus, Lorium, and Elrena seem to all interact in the same worlds. So this would seem to indicate to me that this instance of worldline hopping seen with the dandelion leaders is still within the same set of worlds we have now. From what we know about Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, Ava was teaching the dandelions to exit this world and make it to the Unchained Realm, which is what I believe Luciu references when he states the dandelions travel to multiple world lines. We know that Ephemer was able to make it to this Unchained Realm, however, it is still unclear what this realm is, although I have a possible interpretation. I can say the explanation for another video, but that aside, it seems that Brain has confirmed that they are in fact in a datascape. If we are in a datascape, then Luciu saying, even on a world line with no Keyblade War, would indicate and give more proof that datascapes are encapsulated within this term, worldline. He states though that they traveled to multiple world lines. So if what happened to Maleficent happened to these dandelion leaders, meaning she traveled back in time and the dandelions tried to travel to the Unchained Realm, but were both caught in a datascape, is it possible to argue these multiple world lines would be the datascape and also the Unchained Realm? This actually seems to be the case when Brain states, we thought we had gone back, but it turns out we didn't, which means we can't go back the usual way, meaning that they would have used the power of waking to traverse to the Unchained Realm, but when coming back using the same method, they were trapped like Maleficent. Now, if Ephemer is able to traverse dreams, then that would indicate that this Unchained Realm has relevance with the Sleeping Worlds. And if we know Sleeping Worlds are considered worlds, then the Dandelions' worldline hopping to this Unchained Realm could be further evidence that they are one and the same. So while we have shown that these separate instances don't seem to be the case with the Dandelions with the current information, what else can we explore with this idea of separate instances or parallel worlds? Now, why on earth would I bring parallel worlds into an already complex world that is the Kingdom Hearts universe if we came to a reasonable assumption of what a worldline is? Because of Joshua. Who is Joshua? If you played Dream Drop Distance, then Joshua may be memorable to some, however, to really understand him, one really needs to experience The World Ends With You. So again, if you have not played The World Ends With You, there will be spoilers ahead consisting of plot and postgame. Joshua is a character of high imagination, moving up the chain of command to composer. In this game, there exist angels as well, which are on a higher vibe than normal people with imagination. Mr. H, a supportive character to Neku and his game partners, as well as being the producer of the game and the author of the secret ports, is himself an angel that then sprouts wings and flies away. He states, however, that the composer is able to ascend and enter the plane of angels, meaning Joshua is able to enter this plane. We see Joshua in this very interesting state at the end of the game, as well as sprouting wings like Mr. H in Dream Drop Distance. Even though they seem to be different entities, it's clear there's a connection between Joshua and Mr. H sprouting wings. All that being said, the reason I bring this up is the fact that Joshua has what Mr. H classifies as clairvoyant foresight, though it is unclear if this is because of one's imagination or role of composer. However, in his downtuned state, his vision is somewhat clouded, which explains why he is able to know who Sora and Riku are, even if he is limited in his vision. He also states that both these Traverse towns are grounds, as in reference to the real ground and underground from The World Ends With You. While this detour of discussing vibes and planes may seem a bit of a rabbit hole, it will be important later. Continuing, after Riku and Sora return, Joshua states that he believed the two Traverse Towns were parallel worlds, and that to travel between them, you needed a portal. Now, he comes to the conclusion that these worlds were not in fact parallel worlds, because time flowed differently between them, which goes back to young Xehanort's statement about how each world starts its line at different points in time, as well as having their own variable time. So then, what is a parallel world if they are not distinct worlds that are different? In The World Ends With You, Mr. H states that the world is made up of choices, and that each choice creates a parallel world with a choice not chosen. And thus, like Joshua stated, these parallel worlds would still run along the same timeline. Does this remind you of anything though? It should, because we see this with Yozora's fight in Shibuya, an instance where Yozora wins, and an instance where Sora wins. I find this example perfect in terms of using parallel worlds as an explanation, since it is very confusing seeing these two scenes playing out, not knowing which one is the correct one. It's also in the same location as where The World Ends With You takes place. Neku and Sora even seem to mimic each other, although apparently they are not the same Shibuyas according to Nomura. However, with parallel worlds in play, the Yozora version of Shibuya could still be within the world of The World Ends With You version of Shibuya, just on a different branching choice network. It is also unclear to me right now if the secret episode takes place in a different Shibuya than the one in Remind, since in the Limit Cut episode, we found out that the part Riku is in, Shinjuku, seems to be in his dreams. However, these two instances could be in different places, although the fact Yozora is in Shinjuku makes me think they are connected somehow. Shinjuku does seem to be destroyed in The World Ends With You's additional scenario, meaning that in Kingdom Hearts lore would create a sleeping world. I would argue that the way Riku talks, it seems like he wasn't entering the sleeping worlds to travel to Shinjuku, so it seems unlikely to me that these would be related. However, he could have unconsciously traversed connections he had with the crew from The World Ends With You, but it seems unlikely to me. It seems like a very conscious effort for Sora and Riku to travel to different sleeping worlds, but it is odd that Yozora and the Master would be within Riku's dreams. But anyways, long rabbit hole aside, this idea of parallel worlds still would seem to appear in Kingdom Hearts with this Yozora instance, as well as the fact that Joshua and the World Ends With You crew exist within Kingdom Hearts. However, I would argue a different version of them than in The World Ends With You, since Joshua states they have died while in the secret reports it states that the people participating in the underground are not entirely dead. These parallel worlds exist separate to each other, even if they exist within the same plane. In The World Ends With You, they explain that one has to ascend above the underground to even enter these parallel worlds. They also mention this. Additionally, stress caused by breaking through the barrier can pull down the traveler's base vibe. If the vibe dips, the frequency may be too low to pass through the barrier. In the worst cases, it may render the traveler unable to return to his or her own original world. Does this sound familiar? In the base game, Sora travels back in time to change history, to alter a choice made. In Remind, he travels back yet again to this barrier that has a tear in it that was created when he changed the past originally. Charity states that after he goes back, he will disappear from this world, unable to return to it. I hypothesize that this act is Sora bouncing between parallel worlds. However, at this point, he is unable to return because his vibe has dipped too low. Or maybe in terms of Kingdom Hearts lore, he lost the power of waking. We see he hasn't lost his Keyblade, but the power needed to travel back. Let's circle back to that though in a little bit. So with a parallel world being defined this way, can we say this is a world line? Well, it's a bit tricky. A world line as we defined it is a new world that has a variable line governed by time for that specific world. If a parallel world exists within that world and follows the same time of that world, then can it really be a world line? In the glossary for a tear in the fabric of time, it is defined as follows: a divergence in the fabric of time that occurred when Sora used the power of waking to overwrite the timeline of defeat. When this phenomenon came into being, a new world without defeat was born, creating two contradictory histories within the same timeline. So from this, I would argue that with our worldline definition as it is, this would seem to align. However, this says it creates a whole new world. Is this different to what The World Ends With You says? I feel this is very specific, saying a new world, so I'm inclined to believe that any world has its own worldline, meaning that this parallel world now is its own worldline. I don't know how different this is to The World Ends With You though. This seems to imply that only through meddling can you create a parallel world, whereas Mr. H states any choice made in The World Ends With You spawns another parallel world. I would argue that the explanation in the glossary may be another instance of the game giving an explanation to something as it comprehends it. From The World Ends With You, every parallel world that is created stems from every choice, as well as keeping in sync with the time of that world. In The World Ends With You, there exist these membranes, or barriers, between each world when they are created. And in Kingdom Hearts, it says there is a tear in the fabric of time when Sora uses the power of waking to change events. To me, this seems to imply that there is still this thin membrane between these parallel worlds. And when Sora collected everyone and came back, they broke through this membrane, thus creating the tear in the fabric of time. So while there are many similarities between parallel worlds and Kingdom Hearts, there is this glaring fact that Joshua seems to indicate that parallel worlds track on the same time, whereas if the tear caused a new world to be created, that world would then be its own world line. With world lines defined then, how does travel between them look? If world lines are simply different worlds, then travel between them consists of traveling to them, correct? Then why does Luciu say that these kids are not masters, and thus implying they cannot worldline travel? At the time Luciu is seemingly writing this, the only way you are able to travel to a world line would be to use the power Ava teaches them, the power of waking, or taking these pods to enter or exit the Datascape, as far as I can tell at least. At this point, there would only exist 3 other worlds or realms: the Realm of Darkness, the Unchained Realm, and the Datascape. But once the worlds start returning from darkness, they all are separate, cut off from each other, and in my opinion, their own world lines at this point. Something Xehanort in Dark Road seems to indicate as well. Let's explore the different ways of worldline travel that we have seen before continuing on to this unique power Ava teaches the Dandelions. Gummi blocks are very prevalent in Kingdom Hearts, as the main source of travel for our characters in the form of gummy ships. Donald and Goofy show up in Traverse Town looking for Sora in their gummy ship, Mickey arrives in Radiant Garden in a gummy ship according to Ansem Report 9, and Mickey also has a star shard that he uses very often in Birth by Sleep. This star shard is actually pretty strongly inferred to be a gummy block as well, as Donald and Goofy say in Tarzan's world that the gummy block that drops is not the king's. So we see them a lot in this world, but what exactly are they? According to the Ansem reports in Kingdom Hearts 1, these blocks are actually made up of the world's walls, and are then stated to be the reason why these gummy blocks allow travel between the space between worlds. In the reports, it's noted that once the world's doors open, these walls crumble. However, it states the catalyst is the appearance of the Heartless. So I'm unsure if this means that the Heartless are the ones that tear the walls down, or the door. Either way, once these walls are broken down, the gummy blocks then are able to be obtained as they fall as meteors, it seems, to the world. It also further implies these to be gummy blocks, as it describes them as elastic and easy to bond together, a property we see of gummy blocks. Once these walls are broken down, travel to other worlds then becomes open, as showcased by Mickey arriving and discussing many topics with the author of the reports. These gummy blocks are engineered in a way then to cross world lines. They are created with the internal protective measures in mind, thus keeping those who travel within them to be safe as they traverse world lines. This is not the first time that some idea in Kingdom Hearts is reverse engineered to be used for something. But once these barriers are put back up prior to Kingdom Hearts 2, the way Sora travels changes, using what Yensid states are special lanes. The special lanes that Sora opens in Kingdom Hearts 2 seem quite different to what our next topic is, which are the lanes between. The lanes between are speckled throughout Kingdom Hearts with a very specific motif, their portal. This portal seems to be like a light portal, however, there seems to be almost like a dark corridor surrounding it. The first time we see this chronologically is in Kingdom Hearts Key, where these are the main outlets of transport for our character. It's unclear why they need to use these lanes between, even more so that Chirithy flat out tells the character that the lanes between are already unlocked, meaning that they were at one point locked. A similar line is mentioned in Birth by Sleep when Ericus tells Terra and Aqua that he has unlocked the lanes between. Before, I mentioned there were these special lanes in Kingdom Hearts 2, but the reason I find these separate than the lanes between is because in Kingdom Hearts 3, when Sora uses these lanes between, he seems kind of surprised or unsure what to do. But if he had used them in Kingdom Hearts 2, then he wouldn't need the Keyblade to guide him in using the lanes. However, the argument could be made that him using the Keyblade on these random items in Kingdom Hearts 2 could be opening these lanes between, unlocking them. And this has some evidence backing it up, using the line Eric has said above. Also, Yun Sid states, however, the Keyblade will serve as your guide. When a beam of light radiates from the Keyblade, return to the Gummi ship, which seems very similar to how the lanes between are opened. However, I would state that we do not see the portal appear like most interactions with these lanes. Moving back, in Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, they make no mention of the lanes between, only showing that Chirithy knows the way to these worlds, and then our character opens the gateway. These lanes seem to act like a highway, where you can enter and exit at certain points, to and from a source and destination. We see this fairly well with Ventus, when we see him exit the lanes between to chase this space squid, and with Terra as it pops him out right into the world. We see this every time a character in Kingdom Hearts Union Cross travels to and from a world. Finally, in Kingdom Hearts 3 Limit Cut, we see these lanes between leading Terra, Ven, and Aqua into the Dark Realm. I would like to state that if these lanes between existed to and from the Dark Realm, then why wouldn't Aqua have been able to leave? I guess one could argue that Ericus or someone locked the lanes between at this point, since Yun Sid states they were unlocked again in Kingdom Hearts 2. Or possibly these lanes only exist at certain places, and Aqua didn't know where they were. It's also only implied that that's their destination. They could be traveling to a separate place to then enter the Dark Realm. Either way, we can see that these lanes lead to different worlds and datascapes. Datascape Travel is in Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, since the worlds we travel to at that point are datascapes. But it's possible that the datascape would be the entirety of Kingdom Hearts Union Cross. So it's possible this is one full datascape that they are traversing, rather than multiple different datascapes that they are traveling between. The other thing I would like to add is that both Terra, Ven, and Aqua and Sora have protection from these lanes in the form of Keyblade armor and the Gummi ship, respectively. However, our character from Kingdom Hearts Union Cross does not. Does this mean then that at this point there is not darkness within these lanes? Or does it mean that this idea of protection from these lanes is a lie? Or maybe it was not known that one needed to be protected at this point. One place though that does contain darkness and does need protection are Corridors of Darkness. Corridors of Darkness were introduced in Kingdom Hearts 1, but they seem very different compared to the rest of the corridors that we see in terms of look. It's probably because they are early concepts, but they still seem to act the same, being a fast transportation to and from different worlds and places. In Remind, we are told that these coats ward off darkness, and are used to travel through these corridors of darkness to prevent darkness from overcoming them. We see this with Riku when he travels from Neverland to Hollow Bastion, the mode of travel being inferred as Corridors of Darkness. Diz also hands these coats out to Mickey and Riku to help them travel through these corridors. It's unclear the origins of these black coats, but the Master of Masters is seen giving one to young Xehanort, and Lucia and the Master of Master both have these in the Age of Fairy Tales. In Kingdom Hearts 2, we see Axel having the ability to use these corridors to enter the datascape Roxas is in, which I find interesting. These corridors even allow for travel to the Dark Realm, which with all three of these modes of transportation being open to these corridors of darkness, they make me think of a counterpart to the lanes between. Sora and Kairi are seen jumping through these corridors without anything happening to them, no darkness taking over or anything. It's possible though that Kairi has an immunity being a Princess of Light, but I would say that what Nomura says about Sora not being affected because he didn't use them incessantly would apply to Kairi as well. These corridors have something extra that we do not see with the lanes between, the ability to traverse through sleeping worlds. While it's not a fact that the lanes between do not exist here, we have no evidence that they do, unless Kingdom Hearts Key or Kingdom Hearts Union Cross are in the sleeping worlds, which I'm still on the fence about and wish we had just a little bit more information on. But that aside, seeing as I believe that the Dark Realm and the sleeping worlds are tightly connected, it's possible that Terra, Ven, and Aqua, using the lanes between to seemingly travel to the Dark Realm, it's possible they could travel to sleeping worlds as well. We do not have evidence of that as of right now that I'm aware of. As a side note, I would like to add that Keyblade armor seems to act like these black coats, which is yet another example of something being engineered in relation to an ability the Keyblade provides. Another thing that is engineered in this universe are the worlds themselves. Datascapes in their nature are artificial. In my Datascapes video, I actually have a section there dedicated to artificial versus reality. And while that doesn't cover everything in that topic, I still talk about a lot of different phenomena. Anyways, datascapes are man's attempt to capture a world in a bottle. Datascapes are described in the glossary of Kingdom Hearts 3 as the following. artificial simulations based on real-world data. Inside a Datascape, time can be made to loop indefinitely. As described above, this is like a snapshot of some point in the real world and then can be looped over and over and over again. The Master of Masters is seemingly the first recorded person that I'm aware of to create such a world, and it just so happens to be everything we've experienced in Kingdom Hearts Union Cross, but then seems to expand past what we've experienced when Wreck-It Ralph glitches into that world. In the Datascape, it's seen that the lanes between can still be accessed as well as the corridors of darkness, but outside, to gain access to a Datascape seems very versatile, including the power of waking. These pods that are seen in relation to the Master of Masters and Ansem the Wise, scanning or decompiling from Ansem the Wise's main computer, Diz's beam associated with the Data Twilight Town, corridors of darkness, time travel in the case of Maleficent, and this odd flash of light, which we've seen several times in Kingdom Hearts Recoded, as well as some other places that I mentioned in the Datascapes video. This flash is also seen at the end of the Keyblade War, when Ephemera and Skuld pick up our character, so make of that what you will. Maleficent's travels to, through, and from the Datascape are very interesting as well. Before we move on, I do want to discuss time travel very briefly because Damo279 and I will be doing a much more in-depth discussion on this topic at a later date. Time travel is seemingly a way to traverse world lines as we see Maleficent travel back to the Age of Fairy Tales and the Datascape, which Lucio describes as a world line. We also see young Xehanort time traveling forward using Replica Body as his destination vessel. It's unclear where young Xehanort started, but he does in fact worldline hop when he jumps forward in time and starts interacting with Sora. Sora is seen time traveling from the final world back to the worldline of the Keyblade graveyard as well. While there are rules to time travel, it does in fact seem to have the ability to send yourself to any version of yourself, regardless of worldline. So while it is not technically traversing worldlines through time travel, it does seem to be a byproduct. With that brief explanation of time travel by traversing world lines out of the way, Maleficent gets caught in this Datascape as she is trying to time travel back to a version of herself. She allegedly travels back from Hollow Bastion to an enchanted dominion inside of a Datascape. Once within the Datascape, she learns about where she is and then follows Darkness because he promises a way out by means of a lifeboat or ark. Darkness talks about how this lifeboat was supposed to be a means to escape this world, but it is incomplete and can only escape time, not this world. He specifies the world rather than a world line. If this lifeboat was developed at the time, when the world was whole and only one giant landmass, escaping that world could mean escaping that universe, right? Kind of how the Master of Masters just kind of disappears from existence in this world. And escaping time to Darkness, who doesn't know that all these world lines were created, would just mean going forward in time, even if Maleficent were flung forward to a different world line, since we know she comes back to the mysterious tower when the fairies remember her, instead of to wherever Daybreak Town was, unless she was transported to where Daybreak Town was and then just ventured to where she reappeared. However, with time travel, as we discussed before, it's simply flinging you forward as a heart to this beacon. But I would argue that the way Maleficent time travels forward seems different than the way she time traveled with just her heart. This could be explained with man's attempt at again recreating natural occurring phenomena with the Keyblade and other things. It's possible that using the Book of Prophecies, the Master of Master built these lifeboats after knowing about different world lines in the future. Or since he's been around for so long, maybe the world had split up before and reformed as we know the Age of Fairy Tales to be now. It's very unclear about what this lifeboat is. Many speculate that it could be this machine we see Lauriam and Maleficent fight in front of. We never see Maleficent enter the room that the escape from the Datascape resides in. We just see Darkness open a portal, but Lauriam opens the door, so it wasn't inoperable. We have seen Axel using the Corridors of Darkness to access and leave the Datascape, so this is a possibility. Even further evidence is seen with Terranort putting Kairi in this pod, and we know that he sent her off to Destiny Islands at an early age from Rechained Memories. However, to counter-argue, we have no reason to believe that Lauriam ventures out of this Datascape, and Darkness refers to a singular lifeboat, not multiple. In my opinion then, these pods would then be the door in and out of the Datascape to then use the lifeboat to escape this world. Although, why would Terranort be putting Kairi into a Datascape? Like I said before, once we have more information from the ending to Kingdom Hearts Union Cross and Melody of Memory, I will be doing a follow-up video. Summarizing, Maleficent time travels to reach Datascape worldline that is within a worldline, and then ventures out through means of either a corridor of darkness or a direct line out through the pods, then ventures forward in time with an incomplete vessel, placing her on a different worldline again. The final traversal of worldlines that we will be discussing is the power of waking. This is a tool that seems to be used by Keyblade wielders specifically for worldline traversal in the time of fairy tales. We know that Ava was teaching the dandelions to reach the Unchained Realm, which we've seen that traversing realms requires some kind of worldline travel, whether that be corridors of darkness or the lanes between. I guess though, worldline travel is not the same as realm travel, although technically speaking, the reason you'd be traveling to a different realm would be to access a different world, which does have a worldline. We get a little more confirmation that the power of waking can be used for worldline travel when young Xehanort tells us that it's not used for traversing worlds to reach hearts, but rather traversing hearts to reach worlds. This opens up an interpretation for worldlines that links them closer to hearts. From Dream Drop Distance, we also know the power of waking is used to awaken sleeping hearts. Also in Dream Drop Distance, we are shown that the Keyblade kind of takes action and shows them how to traverse across these different worlds without a Gummi ship or Keyblade armor. Does this mean that at this point they were traversing different worlds as hearts, like young Xehanort said was not what you should be doing? To note, in Kingdom Hearts 3, when Sora is diving into each world's heart to reach that world, is very reminiscent of when Sora and Riku drop in 3D, which is why I believe these to be the same act. I also want to link the passage through the void with the light rays to also be reminiscent and linked potentially to the power of waking, although there does not seem to be much supporting evidence since it seems that this form of travel is through the power of believing enough. Continuing, this power of waking seems to be only learned by or taught to masters, as the Kingdom Hearts 3 glossary states, saying that Sora had it but lost it, and only the King and Riku have it. However, I believe this ability is, unbeknownst to young Sid, a much more versatile ability, seeing as Riku and Sora are able to traverse these worlds because the Keyblade taught it to them originally. But if this is the case, then why would the Keyblade teach them something taboo like traversing worlds, according to young Xehanort? I believe it may have to do with the usage of the power of waking. How does Sora use the power of waking? From what young Xehanort seems to indicate, we are abusing this power by crossing between world lines to follow hearts. But is it possible that young Xehanort is implying parallel world travel? Do we know that Sora is traveling between parallel worlds? From what we are told, he is simply abusing the power of waking, not altering his vibe or actively knowing he is traversing through these barriers. However, we do know a fabric or membrane was torn when Sora uses the power of waking to change things according to the glossary. In Remind, it wasn't clear to me whether or not Sora was using the power of waking as a form of time travel. However, the story section of Kingdom Hearts makes it very clear in saying he used the act of traveling back in time as the embodiment of his heart, and then proceeded to travel the hearts of the Keyblade wielders, using the power of waking. He does then traverse through the terror to reach the other parallel world, seemingly by the power of waking. Continuing, does Sora have the ability to traverse world lines since Lushu says you need to be a master? I think this question is a missing context, as in the past only masters at the time had the ability to use the power of waking to jump world lines. Sora and Riku ultimately are taught this at the beginning of their Mark of Mastery exam. However, an argument can be made that Ventus, since he was in the age of fairy tales and was around when Brain used the worldline hopping technique taught to the dandelions, was the one that could have influenced Sora to do this. The argument I would have for Riku being influenced to worldline hop is a little bit more involved. Essentially, if Riku is being possessed by Ansem, who is being possessed or influenced by darkness, with his eyes turning that yellow color, then Darkness, who hid away in Ventus, potentially would know this secret as well. However, we have no indication that this instance of darkness that hid inside of Ventus had any relation with Riku. Thus, if Ansem possessed Riku, then maybe darkness still had influence in Riku's heart. All of this is a bit of a rabbit hole though. So we've seen that worldline hopping with the power of waking is a thing, but does not seem to be the reason for the disappearance of Sora. Rather than simply traversing to these different world lines, Sora is actively traversing these different worlds to then return his friends' hearts that have completely faded away from existence, which Chirithy states is the taboo act that young Xehanort seems to be telling Sora he's doing wrong. An interesting thing too about this worldline hopping is the fact that the Master of Masters creates prototypes and potentially finished products of what we know as lifeboats or potentially arcs. I would argue that this is yet another man-made reverse-engineered product from an ability of the Keyblade. We know Keyblades are linked to hearts, as the Master of Master creates them or pulls them from the wielder's heart. One last link I'd like to correlate is that of Sora's and Beat's hands being see-through. Maybe there's no correlation, but if Beat is being punished for not following the rules, can the same thing be said of Sora, potentially implying Sora may be inside of a game? With what Lucy knew at the time, worldline traveling seemed highly improbable except for a master. At this point though, scientists have reverse engineered and created their own worlds and form a travel between existing worlds. So at the time, this type of travel seemed very difficult. As time progressed, the worlds you were placed in didn't just end there. There is one form of worldline travel that I did not discuss, which is that of Merlin's. Even his ability to send Sora, Donald, and Goofy back in time is just explained away with magic. If we get further information on this, then I would like to come back and discuss it, but as of right now, I do not have an explanation. Before we wrap up, I would like to discuss some oddities that occur in Dream Drop Distance, potentially concerning worldlines. The different versions of Mickey existing around is what confused me a lot in Dream Drop Distance. We see him in the sleeping worlds of the Musketeer and Mysterious Tower worlds. In the story section, it says it was Mickey when he was still in training, presumably under Master Yun Sid. However, in the Mysterious Tower, it tells us that this world's Mickey is the Sorcerer's Apprentice. I find it odd that it specifically states that. Even in the Musketeer's world, Mickey says he's in this world trying to figure stuff out, but then he never lets on any more about this fact. This seems to me that this Mickey actually may be a heart possessing this Mickey during this event, since it seems like he belongs, but he seems to know more than he should. Even in this world, Pluto's collar is a different color than to every other instance in the series. What I find odd about this is that in Traverse Town in the same game, Pluto has a green collar, so this choice was very deliberate. Furthermore, Minnie seems to be a princess here, and seems to rule over this place rather than at Disney Castle. And furthermore, Pete has a peg leg, but doesn't in any other instance of the series. One explanation, of course, would be that this world is a parallel world that has fallen asleep, that this is its own world line. The only reason I'm hesitant to provide this as fact is how little we still know about worldlines and the fact that Goofy seems to make a reference to this time in Kingdom Hearts 1 in the Jungle World. It's not possible this worldline would have split after this fact, since Pete would still have a peg leg. The argument can be made that because Minnie was a princess at this time, she would grow up to be the queen with Mickey at Disney Castle. The other Mysterious Tower is very interesting. I would say this is a parallel world, given the fact that it has fallen to sleep, and still sleeps as opposed to Master Yun Sid's world, which we haven't seen fall into darkness from Birth by Sleep up until this point. As one could argue that maybe at the time Sora and Riku traveled back, this world was asleep. Also the fact that this Mickey seems to be simply an apprentice to the sorcerer rather than being a Keyblade apprentice to a Keyblade master. Let me draw your attention to a particular piece of media within the Kingdom Hearts universe really quickly. Winnie the Pooh's book. In my previous video on datascapes, I somewhat equated written word as data, thus classifying books as their own datascapes, seeing as Sora was able to enter this world and explore and experience their world with them, much like entering Tron's world. We've also seen the same with video games, where Sora is thrown into a game involving Verum Rex's mechs in Kingdom Hearts 3. So if books and video games are able to be entered and treated as their own worlds, what would happen if we tried to access a movie? We do see that movies exist in Twilight Town, so it's not out of the realm of possibility. We even see promo games for these movies in the form of classic Kingdom games that feature both Sora and Mickey. Seeing as Mickey is himself a king in this universe, and media can be made of him like Classic Kingdom, then it would be possible that other films would exist of him. Films like Fantasia and Three Musketeers, perhaps? We have seen that when a datascape is erased, it does exist in the sleeping worlds as a world. While it's not confirmed, Yozora's Shibuya seems to be a sleeping world that Sora arrives in, as well as Riku, as we discussed above. I would argue then that the same thing could be said of written books or movies, seeing as they seem to exist as their own world lines. This would explain why the characters in the Three Musketeers seem to act somewhat out of character of themselves, why Minnie is the princess of this different land, why Pete has a peg leg, and my biggest hangup, why Pluto's collar is different. You may be asking why Mickey knows about Keyblades, and why he's even there. I would argue that Mickey did something similar to what Maleficent did, which would be to possess a data version of herself. If the Three Musketeers can exist as a film, and then as a sleeping world, then it would also make the same reasoning for Fantasia. Now, as a counter-argument, the fact that most worlds in Kingdom Hearts are actually movies in real life makes this a bit shaky. However, this explanation makes the most sense with the timeline and events we have leading up to this moment. Obviously this is speculative, but I do find it rather odd. Finally, as we described above and a very long time ago, the scene in Kingdom Hearts 1 and Kingdom Hearts 3D are nigh identical, save for the fact that Kairi is missing, they're at a different location and time, and finally that Riku's hair is short. To me this screams a parallel world, and in this case, a different world line. It would also explain why this didn't cause a hiccup in the Kingdom Hearts 1 story, seeing as they would have ventured out onto the raft, whereas in Kingdom Hearts 1, Sora in his room seems to imply as if the raft is still there. The timeline in the world line of Kingdom Hearts 1's Destiny Islands doesn't seem to match up for them to set sail, as well as be where they were in Kingdom Hearts 1. I would argue then that this is a separate world line that Yen Sid sent their hearts to possess their younger selves. It would explain the time of day, location, Riku's hair, and Kairi's absence. And I think that concludes our series on what constitutes a world. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Hopefully this video included everything we know about world lines as of right now, and gives you guys a better understanding. Hopefully you guys can even take this video and say how I'm wrong in this spot or this spot, and give a good basis to then create your own interpretation of what a world line is. Because this is my interpretation. And with parallel worlds, it's kind of difficult because they seem to both follow the World Ends With You's version, but then also with the tearing the fabric of space and time, or tearing the fabric of time, they kind of make up their own interpretation of the World Ends With You's version of parallel worlds, because we have that one world, and then it says it creates another world, in which case those both world lines would have different time, because like Traverse Town in Dream Drop Distance is both Sora's version of it and then the world's version of it, and so those track on different time. But I guess if these are both the same worlds and it's just creating a separate, I don't know. Yeah, I think you guys understand what I'm saying though, hopefully. But again, it kind of mixes the World Ends With You and Kingdom Hearts, like parallel world interpretation in there. There were some parts in the video that I wanted to discuss more in depth here at the end, so I'll hopefully try to get to those in order as they appear in the video. So the World Ends With You, that crew, they potentially could meet their end after the world ends with you, and thus them doing missions would be the dreams just cycling through their lives. And so that kind of makes sense why Shiki then wouldn't look like herself, because in the world ends with you, she actually doesn't look like the character that she's calling herself in Dream Drop Distance. So that's what kind of made me think maybe this is a parallel world version of them, especially too because the Joshua says that they met their end, and in the world ends with you, they technically don't die yet in that world. They're still alive. They're just on like a different vibe. So the fact that they have died would kind of make sense. Like, since their dreams would like kind of recreate their lives, it kind of makes sense why they would be dead and why Shiki would look that way. And so it does kind of go with the Shinjuku, since that was destroyed. It's possible then that Shibuya gets destroyed in the same manner, and thus that would make sense, and that would be probably still the current world line of the world ends with you, and not like a different parallel world version of themselves. And then the next part, we'll be talking about the pods and the power of waking used to traverse to the datascape. The pods, I think, are kind of now 100% verified by Maleficent to say, hey, these are how you get into a datascape. And so it's kind of interesting that Kairi's getting put into this pod. Because when you see that, you're like, oh yeah, she's getting sent off. Because you kind of think, hey, Maleficent's getting sent off. So these would be the arcs or the lifeboats. But I think these are the datascape entrances and exits. Which if that's the case, then that could open up to Kingdom Hearts being itself a datascape. But I don't think that's the case, but it could be, I don't know. But then it's also interesting, and I noted it after the fact, post-edit. With Brain, he's talking about how they jumped with the power of waking to this alternate unchained realm, right? And then when they jumped back, they actually got stuck inside the datascape. And so they're saying they can't exit the Datascape with the power of waking, which I find really interesting. And then the next thing, it was the lanes between and the special lanes being the same thing, seemingly in Kingdom Hearts 2, but different in appearance, because Master Jensen kind of talks about them like they're the lanes between. And Donald even mentions the gate in Kingdom Hearts 3, and that's how they talk about them in Kingdom Hearts 2. But to me, they still seem kind of different, because when you're going through these lanes in Kingdom Hearts 2, it's like kind of like the inside of the keyhole. But in the lanes between in Birth by Sleep, it looks like you're in this like weird tunnel. And I mean, they're both tunnels, but one looks like the keyblade and one looks different than inside the keyhole. So hopefully that makes sense. It could be a wrong interpretation. That's just my take on what they've given us so far. And with Dark Road, the whole like multiple darkness thing, I think I kind of brought it up. I think I brought it up. I'm not entirely sure if I like made it cohesive, but essentially I was trying to say that the darkness that hid inside of Ventus wasn't the same darkness that is influencing Xehanort, since we see multiple instances of them in Dark Road. Or I guess we see one instance, but we know of the one instance with Maleficent and Union Cross. And it's kind of like, to me, that's kind of like saying, hey, this is the darkness that hides inside Ventus, and then it gets shot forward in time, and then Xehanort finds another entity of darkness. And I kind of think that darkness then like kind of hides inside Xehanort. But that's all interpretive. I think we'll get more information when Dark Road kind of keeps trudging on. But yeah, I was trying to say that darkness would probably know about the power of awakening as well. But I think I got that a bit discombobulated. So I want to talk a little bit more about the arc, or the lifeboats that the Master creates. Because him and Darkness kind of talk about, or not the Masters, but Darkness talks about like not escaping this world singular. And at that point in time, the world is kind of still whole. And so Darkness talks about like the world being singular. So like the world is still this one canvas. It's not like multiple canvases with different worlds that you would hop between. And so he talks about escaping time. So like to me, that means, hey, there's a whole universe. Like this is just one little pocket universe, and there's multiple other ones. And it's me and Damo are gonna actually do a video about like time and time travel and stuff like that. So I think we'll probably go a little bit more in depth on that, because there's some really interesting things with certain characters. Because I don't want to give it away yet, because we're kind of working on it still. But there's some similarities between these two characters, or these few characters. Yeah, that kind of focus around time and time travel and stuff like that, which is it's pretty interesting. I'm really excited to talk to you guys about it. But yeah, I guess the question is, the Master created these lifeboats to kind of escape time and the world. But if the world was a singular place at that time, then would that mean the universe? Or did he kind of like have foreknowledge of, like he has the Book of Prophecies, so he sees into the future. So did he create these, like these they're not boxes. I kind of want to assume that these boxes, and I kind of made a hint of that in the video. So the fact that the Masters has the Book of Prophecies means that he knows that in the future there's the world split up into these different world lines. So I'm wondering if he created this like these experiments just for Maleficent to go like forward in time. It's really unclear, not sure, honestly. But to me, this means that either A, the Masters had foresight to make these lifeboats for people to use to travel to the future, or that the Master was creating these lifeboats to then exit this Kingdom Hearts, this world, which is interesting. And I think we'll get more information in the future about it. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. This is going to wrap up this like 3-part discussion that I really didn't intend to make into like a little mini series, but it's here. I honestly don't remember the original theory that I was going to do. I think it was about how Union Cross and Unchained Key were datascapes and sleeping worlds respectively. But that's kind of been proven now. Not the whole sleeping worlds part, but Union Cross is definitely a datascape. But they kind of they kind of just said that now. So it's like, I should have put that theory video out a long time ago. It's probably like 7 months at this point. But it's all good. Yeah, I don't really have too much more to say. If you guys did really enjoy it, I would appreciate you guys subscribing. I don't like asking for that, but it's a YouTuber's thing, I guess, now. Damon and I have been recording like our late night discussions recently. So hopefully we'll be putting out like podcasts or that if anyone's interested in hearing two crazy people go down rabbit hole after rabbit hole. But it's been really fun. It's been not lately because we've both been trying to get our videos out. But yeah, I'm probably gonna circle back to that. We're also going to be doing our time video. Me and Bioroxis, I think, are going to be doing a video, so look forward to that. And I think that's it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys next time.